What's going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for another episode of Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, equipment, gear, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. Today, we're going to be talking about baby handguns, baby mouse guns. Whatever really small guns, like guns that would make a 365 look big, like guns smaller than that. And I'm a big fan, if you listen for any length of time, of carrying a full-size fighting handgun as your concealed carry weapon. That's what I do, that's what I recommend, and I've gone into that for many reasons. So I certainly recommend carrying a full-size fighting handgun. If not, then the compact size. I'm not a big fan of the small, uber small, micro 9s and super small guns if you can carry anything bigger. So why are we talking about this? Well, there are some legitimate reasons, which we'll get into in the body of the episode. Don't forget to subscribe, follow the show, like, leave a comment, hit some stars, interact if you would like to. Anyway, with that, I'm going to put in the bio and then we'll get into the main topic. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as a instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and in some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. I just want to point out on the bio that I don't think that I got through that because I am so big and so bad and the Leroy Brown of gunfighters. I don't think that I survived my time in Iraq or the nastiest streets in the country because I was better than the men around me, because I deserved it and they didn't. I boast in God. God saved me. There are many times where I came close to death, where I could feel that cold hand of death, and I didn't die. And I don't take credit for that. I give all the glory to God for that. God has gotten me through those things, and because of that, I would like to use that experience here on this podcast to help you. With that, blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Let's talk about some small guns. And again, I'm going to quantify this by smaller than a 365, because a 365 is a really, really common handgun today. And by smaller, I mean it either has to be less in mass, less weight, less in some kind of capacity than a 365. Why would I even talk about this when I'm such a big fan of carrying a full-size fighting handgun? Like my number one go-to, I consider my best concealed carry gun that I carry often is a SIG 226 Legion, single action only. It's a full-size combat handgun. My other one is a SIG M17, a full-size combat handgun. And that's what I recommend you carry most of the time. The model's less important, but there are many advantages to a full-size fighting handgun. longer barrel, so you get more velocity even for the same cartridge, like in a 9mm. A 9mm out of, say, a Glock 17 is not the same power as a Glock 9mm out of, let's say, a Glock 43. It just isn't. Also, it's easier to clear malfunctions with a full-size fighting handgun in general because you have more purchase. They're also generally much easier to shoot. But here's the thing. There are times when you can't. There are times when you want a backup gun, which a backup gun is a whole other issue. I carried a backup gun when I was a police officer. That's not uncommon. For a backup gun, it's not your primary gun. Or for times when you either have to choose, and this is the big one, choose between no gun or a super small gun. And in that choice, a super small gun is a better choice than no gun. And yes, still carry a knife. I'm not going to get into the whole knife gun debate. Have both. Now, listen here. These are not going to be as effective as a full-size handgun. I'm not telling you they're a good choice for concealed carry. I'm not telling you that they're just as good. I'm not saying any of that. So just hear me out here. I'm saying better than no gun. More effective than zero. So what are some of these really small guns? Well, kind of the quintessential really small gun that I can think of is the NAA mini revolver, North American Arms mini revolver. These guns are, you would think that being that small and like in a 22 Magnum that they wouldn't be very well made. Everyone that I've ever dealt with has been like exquisitely made. It's kind of fascinating how they can make them that small, that intricate, and that good. So they are really, really well made. The limitation is not that they're like cheap junk. The limitation is that they're so small. Here's how small they are. They are so small that they make a model that fits inside a belt buckle, and not like a giant like rodeo belt buckle, but like a big but not comical belt buckle. They have one that fits inside the belt buckle. That's what kind of size we're talking about. Kind of size that if you held up your hands and you curled your thumb over, you could hold it in your hands and nobody would see it from the other side. That kind of small. The kind of small that you could literally put up a sleeve. That's how small we're talking. They make a bunch of different models, but they're the very small 22 long rifle is considered like their basic model, and they have many different versions of that. Then they have slightly larger. They have one with like a folding handle. They come in 22 Magnum. These are like the smallest repeating handguns that are common. I mean, there were some really like small experimental and model guns and stuff, but like of stuff that's common that you could probably find at a reasonable sized gun store. These are the smallest that I know of. And they actually work. They do actually work. They do actually fire. They do actually have sights. So I'd probably take one of these over a tourist curve. But they do actually work, and they are really cool guns. And the ones that I've ever seen are all stainless steel, which I'm a big fan of. Talk about a little small pocket gun. A gun that you could likely carry in workout shorts. Things like that. It's a phenomenal little gun. Now, it's a single action revolver. 22 long rifle or 22 Magnum. Again, these are not going to stand toe-to-toe. But you're not going to go shoot a USPSA match and stand up to a guy shooting an STI or staccato. That's not the point of these. But if you can't carry one of these, likely you can't carry a gun. They're small, they're lightweight. Again, the smallest practical for this situation gun. I'm not saying you should get rid of your carry gun and carry one of these. I'm saying there might be times where you could carry this and not be able to carry something else. And they do actually work, as in like they fire when you pull the trigger. Also, so I don't forget about it, North American Arms makes another really uber small gun. They make one called the Guardian. And I mean just really small. They make it in 32, which is probably what I would go with, and they make it in 380. And you would say, why would you go 32 when you could go 380? I would reverse that and say, why would you go 380 when you could go 32? When you talk about these uber small guns, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Is 32 as good a defensive cartridge as 380? No, I don't think it is. I don't pretend that it is. But I found in these really small guns, it's easier for me to shoot and control, and it's very likely with a gun like this, I'm going to need multiple shots. And I can get multiple shots more quickly. Those 380s are kind of like trying to hold on to, I don't know, like a rabid weasel that's covered in grease, right? Like they're just hard to hold on to because they have more recoil. They have a really bad power to weight ratio. That's something, if you only ever buy something based on what's on paper, you wouldn't realize. But if you actually go to the range, and these super small guns, I actually prefer the 32. And one gun that I had, and it's one of the guns I got rid of, and I shouldn't have. One, because I didn't get a lot of money for it, and two, because it was just a really good gun. Switching over to another 32, the only other one I'm aware that they still make is, and not they as in North American Arms, I mean like the gun collective, is the Keltec P32. That was a lightweight, tiny little gun, and I remember making headshots with it at 25 yards. It was crazy accurate for as tiny as it was. It was super lightweight. It was super easy to carry. It had, reliable semi-auto. And in 32, it wasn't out of control. And when you start stepping up to like 380, like the 380 or the 380 LCP or the 380 Bodyguard, I remember when that first came out when I was a cop, that was real popular for backup gun, like the 380 Smith & Wesson Bodyguard. When you get to guns like that, especially today, I'm getting to the point where why wouldn't I just carry a regular size 365? If you talk about a 365 with a bunch of stuff on it, it shoots better, but it's probably too big for the application. So those really, really small 380s, if that's what you have, like a Ruger LCP, but I would even step down in caliber. Like they make the LCP in 22. Now, hold on. I'm not saying 22 is the best defensive caliber. I'm not saying it's a great defensive caliber. I'm not saying you should carry a 22. What I'm saying is when you get into really, really small guns like this, because I know this might be a controversial episode, when you get into really small guns like this, I would rather have a gun that I can get fast follow-up repeatable shots with in a caliber like that, as opposed to a gun that's a similar size. Again, we're talking LCP 22 versus LCP and 380, where I get one shot, and no matter how hard I grab it, I have to adjust the grip of my hands and find my sights again. I don't consider that very practical. So I would step down in caliber. Speaking of that LCP and 22, that's a pretty intriguing option. Now, 22 has its own issues. It's generally not as reliable at ammunition, and reliability generally goes down when you make the gun smaller. If I was going to carry one of these, I don't even know one, but if I was going to carry one, I would really, really test that ammo. That is one of the good things about 22. You can get a lot of the ammo and run it and train with it. And a good thing about the less recoil, you're probably not putting a ton of rounds to your LCP in a range session. You could probably put a lot more rounds to a 22, and that has its own advantages. Perhaps the biggest advantage in that you'd be more proficient with it. But I would certainly go with a good, really good. My number one criteria wouldn't even be that it was one of the Gucci 22 defensive ammos. It would be that it was really good, reliable in that gun. If it was really good and reliable in that gun, and it happened to be one of these fancy high-end Gucci defensive loads for 22, I'd be all about it. But I would choose reliability over pretty much anything else in a super small 22 because they're prone to be unreliable in the first place. You might think that I skipped over a round, and I did. The 25 auto. Okay, I think the 25 auto ballistically is less effective than a 22 long rifle. It's just, it is like the quintessential mouse caliber. However, it is still center fire. It still uses small pistol primers. So it's probably all other things being equal. And when you talk about this world, probably they're not equal, but if you had a very similar gun, what is it, like Taurus makes a TP22, I think, if I remember correctly, in 22, and they make like a TP25 and 25 auto, I would think all things being equal, the 25 auto would be more reliable because it's a center fire, and center fires are inherently more reliable. There aren't a lot of 25 autos being made today. I wouldn't really recommend that. The real cool, like OG ones of these are going to be your Berettas, and their various versions of the Cat model. The Bobcat, the Tomcat. They made a 22, a 25, even a 32. The 32 is a bit big, actually, by today's standards, so I wouldn't recommend it. But the 22s and the 25s, they got, a lot of them have that tip-up barrel. If they don't all have the tip-up barrel, straight blowback. A lot of these that I've seen aren't real reliable, but a lot of these are decades old. And I got to imagine all the ones I've ever used, the magazines, have been decades old. And that might be a big cause of the unreliability. I do believe Beretta still makes these little Tomcats, Bobcats in 22 and 25. And if you want like a really small gun like this that's like metal on metal, kind of like a classy, really, really small 1911, if that's kind of what you're looking for, those Berettas are really well made, really small guns. I guess we should bring up the Derringer. Now, the Derringers, although very small and have a lot of horsepower, they are heavy. I have one of the really old, I think, Remingtons in 38 Special. But the thing about the Derringers is they're pretty heavy. Go look at what a Derringer weighs. And although it's really small, you might find that it's heavier than a bigger, higher capacity small semi-auto handgun. Just look at, like, literally go look at what they weigh. They're pretty heavy. Now, that may not matter to you. Going back to, like, the cop backup gun thing, a lot of cops, just a little tactical tip here, many cops may carry a backup gun in their spare handcuff case. And if you're carrying a giant Sam Brown, if you're carrying your gun on a giant Sam Brown, a big duty belt, doesn't really matter if it's 3 or 4 or whatever ounces heavier, because you're carrying on a giant belt. What is that compared to your radio and your 2 sets of handcuffs and your baton and your spare magazines and all that other stuff, right? Those few ounces equal pounds, yeah, but those few ounces on a gun, probably not going to matter. And if it's slim and it fits in your handcuff case, you're probably not going to notice it. Also, many of these Derringers come in what I would call full-size fighting handgun calibers. I'm talking 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, 45 ACP. So you had the advantage if you're a cop and you're carrying, this is a backup gun, or civilian, I guess, that if your primary gun went down, got shot, whatever, it's a Springfield XD, it just stops working. You have your backup gun, you can probably even feed it when you open it with your magazines. Like if you're carrying a 9 and a 9, you could swing these open and just use your magazine kind of like a speed strip and shove the rounds in there and close it. So you could get it in a similar caliber. I wouldn't make that a main criteria for me. The odds of you getting to do that in that kind of situation are, I don't know what they are. I don't know. I'm not aware that it's ever happened, but it is a thing to consider. And if you just didn't want to have to buy other kinds of ammo. So those Derringers are super small. They also, though, are super heavy, and they are kind of a beast to shoot. Even mine that I had in 38 Special was kind of a beast to shoot. It was a tiny little 38 Special. And talking about 38 Special, I'm going to bring in the super light J-frame type guns. And you might think, wait a minute, those are bigger than a 365. Well, bigger in some ways and not in others. The SIG 365, which is kind of a de facto carry gun for today. It's a real common carry gun. But it weighs 17.8 ounces. My Smith & Wesson J-frame 360 PD weighs 11 point something ounces. That's a lot less. That's not a little bit less. That's a lot less. When you look at that as a percentage, that's a lot less. And it's in 357 Magnum. Now, I don't often in the city carry it with 357 Magnums. I'll generally carry it with 38 Special because, again, going back to the power to weight ratio, it's far more easy to get follow-up shots with 38 Special than 357 Magnum. I'll be honest, with 357 Magnums, that thing is miserable to shoot. With 38 Specials, it's not bad. And 38 Special is not a bad defensive round. I mean, it's what cops use for decades in this country. And there's been a lot of advancements even in 38 Special in the last, 15 years or so. There's a lot of really good projectiles in 38 Special. So you're talking a lot less. And if I'm carrying super small like that, I'm probably carrying it, I usually carry it in a pocket. If it's a backup gun, what I'll generally do is carry it in an offside pocket, meaning my primary gun is strong side hip on my strong side, and my backup gun is on my inside my weak pocket, meaning my left hand pocket. Or depending on the mission, maybe my back left pocket, because they're small enough to fit in a back left pocket. Going back to when I was a police officer, a J-frame was, I think, the only backup gun I ever carried was a Smith & Wesson J-frame. Revolvers also have certain advantages in situations where you might find yourself, if you needed a backup gun, like wrestling around on the ground. And, does it have the capacity of a 365? No, it doesn't. But it has, 5 rounds of 38 Special 357 Magnum, and it's quite a bit lighter. Not a trivial amount lighter, a lot lighter. And if I'm carrying in a pocket, which I often do, the fact that the revolver is round in many aspects, it blends in with like a leg or the flow of a garment much better than usually the square outline of a semi-auto handgun. There are situations where you could throw a smaller semi-auto in your pocket, even if it's smaller than the J-frame, and it looks like you have a small gun in your pocket. Whereas when you throw the J-frame in, it just kind of bulges and looks like you have whatever in there. But it doesn't really give away that it's a gun in a way that carrying a small semi-auto and like a pair of dress pants or slacks would give away. Now, I mentioned I carry a 360 PD, but probably one of the more common ones is the Smith & Wesson, just a classic 642, and I don't have all the numbers memorized, right? I have 2 Smith & Wesson J-frames. They're kind of my go-to small handguns. And again, I've been actually a Smith & Wesson J-frame is the first handgun I ever bought with my own money. When I went to the Marines, they issued me a handgun, and then when I went to work for LAPD, they issued us a duty gun, but we had to buy our backup gun. I bought a Smith & Wesson J-frame. I still have it, by God's grace. But they're what they would call like their air weight, just a much more affordable, a much more common, I think, option. Their 642 weighs 14.6 ounces. And all the advantages I aforementioned. Now, am I telling you that revolvers are better than semi-autos? No. Am I telling you in most situations I would rather have a J-frame than a 365? No. But what I am telling you is that I wouldn't always rather have a 365 than a J-frame, by the fact that I own 2 J-frames and I do not own a 365. There are still, in 2024, yes, there are still advantages to a revolver. Contact shots, CQB scenarios, the environment in which the gun is being carried, meaning a dirty pocket. The fact that can be in a much more potent round, and the fact that it doesn't need for the slide to reciprocate back and forth to operate, so I can actually shoot it, especially like in the winter if my hand's in let's say a hoodie pocket, my hand can literally be on my gun and I can shoot through the pocket. Now you could do that once with a semi-auto, but you should be able to do it until the gun's empty with a revolver. And many other scenarios, like where you're ground fighting, if you do any kind of ground fighting, mixed martial arts, any of the Western martial arts, boxing, wrestling, when you're doing that kind of ground fighting and grappling, the revolver does have some distinct advantages. Again, it's not 100% better. And I'm not even recommending you carry a revolver for your main carry gun, but they do have certain advantages, and they are lighter, and if you get a decent one, than a 365. I should mention the other big one in the room for the snub-nose revolver category that are pretty decent revolvers and I would actually recommend. There's a lot of cheaper snub-nose revolvers, but revolvers generally are pretty complex inside and should be made well. So I recommend the Smith & Wesson J-frame and also the Ruger LCR. Ruger LCR, I just looked it up, their 38 Special version weighs 13.5 ounces. Now, they do make one in a 9mm, yes, a revolver in 9mm, and they do make them in 357 Magnum. Now, those are quite a bit heavier, so you kind of lose out on the weight there. If you were going super light in a 357 Magnum, I would go back to Smith & Wesson because they're quite a bit lighter. They also make one in 22 long rifle, which ironically is a little bit heavier than the 38 Special. I assume that is because there's actually less milling in the cylinder, if I think about that, meaning the hole that you have to drill through the cylinder to make the hole for the 38 Special is bigger, so it removes more material, so it's probably lighter than the 22 where you remove less material. So that makes sense in my head. But actually the 38 Special is lighter, and it's going to be a more effective round in most cases. Although the 22 long rifle gives you 8 rounds instead of 5. So anyway, just some thoughts. But the Smith & Wesson J-frames and the Ruger snub-nose revolvers, LCRs, they still can be quite a bit lighter. And I still think they're plenty effective, again, for this application. I'm not saying they're the best go-to carry gun. So anyway, just a couple of different options there. Certainly not all of them. I've probably forgotten some very small handguns, and if I forgot it, if I totally didn't mention it, that doesn't mean that it's bad. Just apply what I mentioned to you and look up, and you know my 3-year rule. All the ones that I've mentioned have been out far more than 3 years. You know kind of my general rule on that if you listen for any length of time. Don't be a beta tester in a gunfight. Don't chase after the next uber cool Gucci thing that may or may not work, because lots of gun models when they first come out have issues, even from really good manufacturers. Glock, SIG, Smith & Wesson, right? They've all had recalls. Ruger, they've all had recalls. They're all good companies, but when a new model comes out, there's only so much testing at the factory you can do versus, thousands or tens of thousands or even more people using the gun. So if it's for a fun gun, that's one thing. If it's a gunfighting gun, don't be a beta tester in a gunfight. My general rule of thumb for that is about 3 years. I don't think this gun, the life card, I didn't mention it. I don't know that it's been out 3 years. I just saw it. Maybe it's been out for a while and I just didn't know about it, but it kind of does not look like a gun at all. So it's like deep camo. It looks like kind of like a cell phone when it's folded up. It just looks like a square. 22 long rifle or 22 Magnum, 7 ounces. So it's definitely got the light thing going. But again, I don't know how long it's been out, so don't trust it unless it's proven. Anyway, if I did not mention a model, or you carry something and you thought I should have mentioned it or something, let me know about it, right? Reach out to me. Let me know. If you listen on Spotify, you can interact pretty easily that way. There's a question thing on there. Also, while you're doing that, I wouldn't mind a review or hitting some stars. If you want to contact me, you can contact me at goodshepherdtraining.com. Before I go into the tactical tip on that, also in addition to those things, instead of going into the Patreon deep dive today, I'm just going to ask you guys to pray for me. If you listen to the State of the Podcast address, you might realize there might be some changes coming in the podcast and in my life. Got a few different irons in the fire by God's grace, different things, professional gunfighting type stuff coming up. So I would ask you to pray for me that I have the discernment to know what God wants me to do, because that's more important than what I want to do. I pray for the discernment and the wisdom to know what God wants me to do, and then the intestinal fortitude, the courage to actually do it. Anyway, if you want to pray for me, I would appreciate that. With that, your tactical tip of the day, we talked a little bit about CQB. One of the tactics I learned doing some stuff with some people and some things. Hopefully I didn't give anything away there. But I've done plenty of things that I really can't talk about. But one of the techniques I learned in one of those places, if you were doing close quarters battle stuff, you're literally ground fighting, doing contact shots with a semi-auto. If you notice on most semi-autos, if you shove the gun hard into something, whatever that something might be, right? Something with skin and bones and flesh. You shove that handgun into something, it will push that barrel and slide backwards, taking it out of battery. The gun literally will not fire like that. You got a revolver, no problem. But with a semi-auto, you shove hard into something, which you might if you're excited. That gun's not going to fire. Not even once. So you could do a couple of things. You could shoot from attention, but one of the techniques that I was taught was shove your thumb hard against the back of the slide, holding it forward, shove it into the target and pull the trigger. Is this going to hurt your thumb? Yes. Yes, it is. Right? We're talking about playing 4D chess for keeps here. We're not talking about playing badminton or what people play for fun, golf, right? We're talking about a life and death struggle, literally. You can keep that slide forward and in battery and shove it hard into something and pull the trigger, and it will shoot once. After that, you will have to obviously clear a malfunction because the slide will not reciprocate. Forget about your thumb, you got bigger problems right now. You probably, if you get an opportunity, if that gets some space, then you can clear the malfunction. But if the bad guy your adversary gets the gun, he may likely, if he's an untrained, like street criminal, he likely may not know how to clear that gun. He may just try and pull the trigger. He may not know how to clear a malfunction, which is good for you because you're not going to get shot with your own gun. Anyway, it is a technique. Am I telling you that it's 100% safe? No, I'm telling you it's better than dying. Anyway, with that, we'll roll into the tactical verse of the day. From Psalm 94. Blessed is the man whom you discipline, Lord, and whom you teach from your law, so that you may grant him relief in the days of adversity. In our group chat that we have for the podcast today, one of the guys sent a verse, and reading that reminded me of that verse that he sent. It's when Paul talks about a good father disciplines his son. We are sons of God. God disciplines us. Now, no discipline, no correction seems pleasant at the time, but it is good for us. In fact, I'll just read that passage and then we'll close out this episode, man. I appreciate you tuning in. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us, as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. But no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterwards it yields peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it.